Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of What's on Your Mind. My name is Niwadi Belu, or that African butterfly, as I'm known in social media. And I am so excited to bring another episode of this week, another episode of What's on Your Mind. And this week, I have with me Dana Lewis. He is the #1 relationship coach in Baltimore. So we are going to be talking some relationship things. He is a licensed clinical social worker. But I'm going to let him tell a little bit more about himself. Hi, Dana. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, how you doing? I'm
I'm
glad to
doing
be
well.
back. Glad to be with you all tonight. My name is Dana Lewis, licensed clinical social worker. I'm a certified premarital and marriage counselor. I've been certified in premarital and marriage counseling now for 3 years. And I'm the #1 Baltimore therapist, man. And I love helping couples just to heal, just helping couples to navigate various dynamics that come up in their relationship and be there to provide support, guidance, and give them tools so that their relationships can thrive.
And we love that because there's a lot of talk in these streets these days about relationships and what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And it's a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with lived experiences, but so many people have something to say without reading up on anything, getting additional knowledge on stuff. They're just like, oh, I
Right.
saw this one time and now I'm preaching it like the gospel.
Right.
So I
Everybody's a
always bring in a specialist when I can.
right, exactly.
So let's just jump right into it. Today we're going to talk about a couple of things. I'm excited about the soul ties part of the conversation. Well, we'll get there. But you posted something the other day that really intrigued me, which was that there's a difference between making an apology and making a repair. So what is that difference in the context of a relationship?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about making an apology, right? I look at making an apology like a band-aid to a situation in the relationship. So making an apology is saying, you know what? I'm addressing what happened. I'm deeply remorseful about it. Hey, I'm sorry, babe. I'm sorry that this went this route. Any way I can make it up to you, I am deeply sorry. So in that moment, I'm expressing words, I'm expressing my emotions to talk about what happened in that relationship right there, right? So apology is like a band-aid to a situation. Whereas when we're talking about repair is when you and your partner are making a conscious decision, right? To engage in actions that will look to mend whatever that was that caused harm to the relationship. So repair, we putting in more actions with that. And I look at repair as the surgery. We're doing surgery towards the problem. We're not putting a band-aid on it. We're doing surgery, right? So when we're talking about repair and then we're making this conscious decision to repair, what does that look like? Are we looking to go to couples counseling, right? Are we tapping into that? Are we looking to address each other's triggers, right? Are we talking about boundaries? Are we talking about ways that we can do better action wise to mend whatever it was that caused harm to the relationship? And when we're talking about repair also is helping to build back that trust again in the relationship.
Mm. And like, is there any time where just the apology is okay, or do you always need to follow it up with steps for repair?
I would say the apology is okay depending on the situation, right? Now, if it was something very egregious, where it's like, okay, we keep running into communication issues, we keep disrespecting each other in communication, then an apology may not suffice. We may need to get some repair work done. We may need to go to couples counseling or somebody that can lead us and guide us to have better communication. So if the problem in the relationship is causing significant harm, right, where it's causing the relationship to stall, it's causing the relationship again to not thrive, then that's where repair would be necessary. But then in some instances, an apology can suffice. If we say, hey, I'm sorry about this, and then I can make a quick shift in making sure that it don't happen again, then yeah, an apology can suffice. But repair is for those things that where we see that we constantly keep hitting these potholes in. We constantly keep hitting these roadblocks, and it's causing us to grow distant, grow apart, cause even more discord, and it's causing the relationship to disintegrate, then that's when we got to tap into repair mode.
Mm. Now, something for me that I've always struggled with, whether it's relationships or with friends, is
Mhm.
that, like, you want to give your partner grace or your
Yeah,
friend grace. Nobody's perfect. So
vice
if
versa.
you give an apology and you're making the steps for repair, I'm in it with you, right? But how, at what point can you throw in the towel and say, like, listen, it's not happening. It's just not in you. Like, I see the effort. It's not happening. Like, is that okay for me? Like, is that like okay to be like, I'm sorry, thanks for trying, but it's taking too long, or it's not happening? You keep reverting back to your old behavior.
Mhm. No, that's great. That's a great question. So with that, it's all about, again, your boundaries, and your capacity in that moment. So when we're talking about that particular question, I do need to see that you are consistent, right? That you're showing consistency in wanting to change your behavior with me, right? Because as I see that you are consistent with changing your behavior with me, what that communicates is that you respect me.
Mm.
See, what happens here is that when we are not consistent in changing our behaviors towards someone, when we've communicated that we would, that could communicate, again, disrespect. And we also have to understand, like, okay, is that too much for me? Can I handle this moving forward if this person hasn't been consistent in showing that they want to change their behavior? So if it's in that case, then I would, again, assess it, have the conversation with the person that, hey, I've been giving you X amount of grace. I've been giving you time to heal, repair, do the things necessary to show me different. But I feel as though it's not hitting for me. We still are running into the same issue. And I feel as though for me and my mental health, that this may not be the best thing for me. And this
Mhm.
is after you've done intentional assessment, right? Not impulsively saying, well, I'm just going to throw in the towel. But you've been keeping a track if the person has been consistent with wanting to change their behavior towards you.
Are there things that you would say we should keep in mind for doing those intentional assessments, like key things that we should ask ourselves when we're looking at the situation?
Absolutely. Like, okay, what's my capacity? You know, what are my boundaries? Are they overstepping my boundaries? Are they respecting my boundaries? Right? That's two questions you can ask yourself while doing the assessment. And also something to think about is the person's actions, are they causing me to feel drained? Is it harming me or is it benefiting me in this moment? And really being honest with asking yourself that question and answering that question as you are going through the assessment.
Mhm. Yes, and as you said, the quote that's going around is the best apology is changed behavior.
Absolutely.
Yep,
I mean, she
absolutely.
Miss Baker hit it right on the head because when you change your behavior, because a lot of communication is what nonverbal.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking to change my behavior, that communicates to the other person that, you know what, they do respect me. They are deeply apologetic about what they have done, and they are invested in this relationship because they are doing the necessary things to change.
Mm. Yes, and D.A. Chuck mentioned the boundaries are so important, and you mentioned that as well. And yeah, setting those boundaries. Now, boundaries is my word for the year because I really struggle with it.
Uh-huh.
I've learned that I really need to work to make my boundaries stronger than my empathy. I kind of let people walk around me more because I'm trying to have so much empathy, but then it messes up my boundaries. And
Mhm.
something that's really, really helped me is thinking that boundaries aren't for walling other people out, it's for advocating for yourself, right? You're
Yes.
advocating for yourself. um,
Advocating.
so my question is, though, that can also come across to a lot of people like an ultimatum. Like, how so I have a two-part question. What's the difference between
Two-part.
setting a boundary and an ultimatum, and then also how do you express your boundaries to someone in a way where it doesn't come across like an ultimatum?
Right. So the first question was, what's the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum? Right. An ultimatum sounds like a contract, where a boundary is more so, this is what I don't like, and this is how it's impacting me. Right. So ultimatum, well, if you don't do this, then I'm not doing this. I'm withholding that.
Right.
Sounds very contractual, right?
Mm.
Whereas a boundary is me advocating for myself and saying, this is what I don't like when you do this. And this is how it makes me feel. So this is the line that I'm drawing in the sand for you not to cross.
Mm.
So that's the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum. And what was the second part of the question?
Well, you just answered it, which was how do you express that to someone?
Oh,
How do you
okay.
express your boundaries to them without it sounding like you're giving them an ultimatum?
Yeah. So pretty much using your I statements. I feel, and then state what you feel. I feel. Using those I statements so that it's personalizing it to you and not pointing at them. And at the end of the day, right, when we talk about boundaries, one thing that I've seen when it comes to boundaries is that when you state and set your boundaries, people will get upset about that.
That I've learned.
They will get upset because they now have to deal with you in another way that's not as advantageous to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, you flipping the script on me? Oh my gosh. What you mean? It wasn't like that 2 weeks ago. Now you changing up. And that's some of the ways that people will try to guilt trip you into not making you want to set boundaries. But at the end of the day, and this is something that I tell people when it comes to boundaries, is that boundaries are for who? You. Kind of going back to what I said earlier about capacity. You know your mental health, you know what you can and cannot take. And the boundaries are for you. People may not understand your boundaries, but you understand what you need to feel well overall when it comes to relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And boundaries, are necessary for relationships, right?
Yep.
Because without no boundaries, then we don't know how to really engage with one another.
Mm-hmm.
We'd be all over the place. Anything goes, right? And boundaries keeps the relationship together. It's like a glue there. One of the main glues to a relationship. It's like an ingredient.
Yeah. And I mean, and the thing about it with focusing on you, I feel like an area where a lot of couples run into problems is like you grow as people, you grow, your likes, your change, your work, your stuff. And that sometimes causes a change in boundaries. And
Absolutely.
It's hard with friendships and all of that stuff, but especially with relationships as well. And like you said, I think people do sometimes kind of guilt trip you when you change those boundaries. For me, like that's been part of this season of change is like, I almost hate to use the phrase leveling up, but that's almost like the best way to phrase it, especially like this is more like on like my entrepreneurial and like life side, but I have to impart those and you almost get the guilt of feeling like, oh, you think that you're doing better. So now you want to change up on me. It's like, but I have to change the way I move to move in these different circles, or because I have these different opportunities or things opening up to me, I can't have the same boundaries as I had before.
Absolutely. And boundaries, like you were mentioning, are seasonal. It's about knowing what season am I in at this current time and what parameters do I need for me so that I can thrive in relationship, life, business, right? So all the way around. So boundaries are seasonal when it comes to relationships in particular.
Yes, and DJ Chuck just had something up. If you could pull that back up about boundaries. Yes, once you set those boundaries, you'll weed out the bad seeds and make your life much better, which is true. It quickly weeds out the people who are using you more than anything else.
Kind of like what I was saying. That's absolutely right. It's like a litmus test to see who's for you and who was draining you.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Now, speaking of draining you, you also had another post that really intrigued me, which was that the difference between soul ties and relationships. First off the bat, what is a soul tie?
A soul tie, in a nutshell, is a deep, right? A deep and strong emotional and spiritual connection to someone. We going beyond the surface. It's like we are intertwined with each other.
So don't
Feelings.
we want that? Isn't that what we should be aspiring to?
Yeah. Now let me clear that up, because I'm
Okay.
glad you mentioned that, because it's a positive aspect of looking at soul ties, and of course there's a not too good of a side of soul ties, right? So yes, that's something that we should aspire to go after when we're talking about relationships, healthy soul ties, right? So when we're talking about healthy soul ties, these are relationships that make me come alive. When I'm around this person, I feel energized. I don't feel drained. I don't feel exhausted, right? Those are the type of relationships where I feel safe. The person makes me feel safe. They are demonstrating what? Trustworthy behaviors, right? That's the type of relationships where I can be comfortable in expressing myself without feeling like I'm going to be ostracized or judged or condemned. I can be vulnerable about certain things with this person, and that person not use it against me as a weapon, right? These are healthy soul tie relationships. Healthy soul tie relationships is where we have a mutual respect and admiration for each other.
Mm.
The respect is here, is not here and here. we
Now,
we
do we have control over our soul ties? Like, 'cause I think sometimes people will hear soul ties and also think like soulmates, and then they picture like our eyes met across the room and it was a blah blah blah. And we know it's not all that. But is soul ties something that is like a instant you just know, or is it something that can like grow and be nurtured into that deep of a level of a relationship?
I would say the latter. It would have to be something that you pour into, that you're planting seeds into. Because when I think about the way that you mentioned it just now about, oh, I found my soulmate. Like, okay, you might have felt that, but to know somebody on an intimate level, it requires what? An investment.
Mm.
It requires an energy investment of your mental, your physical, and emotional, to connect with somebody, to see if you guys can intertwine with each other on that deep emotional and spiritual level. So that will take some time of hanging out with that person, asking them questions about who they are, and vice versa. They asking you questions about who you are, that goes beyond the surface. And what I've seen just over the years doing this work is that when people mention, I found my soulmate,
Mhm.
sometimes I've seen this where they're moving too fast in the relationship.
Mm.
Oh, he the one, oh, she the one. You're moving fast, and you're impulsive, and you're just going too fast without really getting the understanding of who am I dating, who's in front of me. Oh,
Mhm. Just say it again. Yes. No,
yeah,
and that's a great question too, because I was going to ask, because a lot of times when we see conversations, at least I'm always online. So when I see those conversations about soul ties, it's usually also from the standpoint of intimacy, and whether intimacy should be waited on, whether once you have intimacy, it creates those soul ties that you just can't break. Like, where does it come into play in the relationship? Is it something that it's going to cause it for you to think, like you just said, that it's happening
yeah,
faster than it is because you've added intimacy?
for sure. Now, what I want to say to that is when it comes to intimacy and soul ties, that's where soul ties in an unhealthy way are formed, is
Mm.
in intimacy, right? And let me explain. So when you are intimate with somebody on a sexual level, your whole body is open. Your mind is open, your pores are open. You're at your most vulnerable state, right? So when you are engaging in sex with somebody, intimacy on that level, you are at the whim of them. So, not to be too graphic, but if you're having sex and you're like, yeah, that's mine. And you be like, yes, that's yours. You just made a covenant contract right there with that person
Mm.
in a soul tie kind of way. So just say, for instance, the relationship doesn't work out. You gave your body to someone. Now it's a spiritual connection, as
Yep.
Charles said right here.
Yep.
Now it's that spiritual connection. And now that the relationship may have stalled or not work, now this person is what? Living inside of you now,
Mm.
because you gave them your body in that moment. So now that you guys are not together, you still may be thinking about this person, right? You may see certain things about that person that make you quiver inside, right? You may be thinking very like jealous, over possessive now because it's like, I gave this person my body, the sex was great. I don't want him or her with nobody else. So then you start to get jealous, possessive, you know, you may can start to think that I can't live without this person, right? You may start to think of like, okay, they need to fill my cup because I can't fill it myself. So bringing in that intimacy, right? It just can convolute things and cause it to be very distorted because, again, intimacy is what? The highest form of communication.
Yeah. And, so it makes me think too, because, like we talked about, like in those moments, you have that spiritual connection, you have that whatever, but we also know that we are in a time of like swipe right on Tinder, hook up, Tinder Grinder, all the things, and like it's whatever. Certainly there are some of us who are like, we can't, we're too emotional, but there really are people who think that they can just hook up. Like, are they deluding themselves, or is there a way to protect yourself where you can keep your intimacy casual, like not intimate, like have it just be fun playtime and move on? Or are you always opening yourself up to that connection?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with that, for those who are out there dating, right, this is about knowing your values before even going out on the date. Knowing your values, knowing your principles, knowing your boundaries, and being able to articulate that when you're in front of this person that you're dating, right? Because a lot of times we find ourselves getting into unhealthy behaviors or actions in relationships while dating because we are not moving on our values and principles, and we're not being as upfront with the person about those things, right? So date with a standard. That's pretty much what I'm saying.
Yeah. But what about like the people who are trying to like, so friends with benefits, it's a phrase we heard, or F buddies, right? Like, is that even possible? Because we know they don't always end well. And is the main reason for that because of soul ties? Like, we'll use the phrase often, or we hear it often, dematized or p-whipped, like it sounds
That's
like it's also just a different way of saying soul ties. Like, you've linked those
pretty
soul
much.
ties, you just don't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly what I was describing earlier in the intimacy. You become, and I can just hopefully I can say it, digmatized.
Mhm.
You become, or as the guys say, you become p-whipped, right? And that is a soul tie.
Mhm.
You know that though. When you think about intimacy, going back to that, just think about it, right? You're exchanging fluids with this person. So if I'm exchanging fluid, bodily fluids, that's soul to soul physical connection there. So now you're inside of me and I'm inside of you. So now it's like we can't separate from each other, right? And when we think about intimacy, right, and sex in particular, the safest place to have sex where a soul tie is not even an issue, and just to throw this out here, is in marriage, because you're under a covenant at that point where it is a sacred thing that's not defiled.
Yeah. Now, let's say that you messed up. You've linked that soul tie, but now you realize that person is a hot mess.
It's a
Can you
hot
break the soul ties? Like what can you do to like break away from that?
You can break out of the soul tie. You do not have to be in bondage to a soul tie. If you notice that, like you said, this person was not for me, this person is destructive, you can break soul ties. So with that being said, how do you break a soul tie? The first thing that you have to do to break a soul tie is to acknowledge that it exists.
Mm.
Not be in denial that I'm under the control of somebody else's soul. They got me under control, right? So when we acknowledging that I'm experiencing a soul tie, what needs to happen is that we need to take an analysis, right, of the relationship and really pinpoint how this soul tie is causing destruction in my life, right? And then once I've identified that it's causing destruction in my life, then I have to identify what's my why. What's my why for breaking this soul tie? And I say, what's your why? Because the why is going to do what? It's going to motivate you to what? To want to heal. It's going to motivate you to do the necessary actions or do whatever it takes to get that soul tie off of you.
Mm.
So the first thing you want to do is acknowledge that I am intertwined in a soul tie right now. It's causing me to act out in ways that I don't like. Like I described before, I can't think without this person. I'm always fantasizing about this person. I'm always wondering where this person at. I'm checking their stories. Where they at in the story? I'm looking for them on Instagram and Facebook. I'm just over obsessed with this person, and we're not even together. That's some of the signs of a soul tie. The second way to break out of a soul tie, and this is critical and it will take a lot of work, is that you got to start cutting out things in your life that makes you think about that person.
Mm.
So if it means I got to stop following them all up in their
No.
videos,
Yeah.
seeing what they doing, right? So if it means I got to cut out or unfollow them on social media, right? Do I got to remove songs from my playlist that reminds me of that person, right?
Mm.
Is there any items per se in my home that makes me reminisce about that person? Do I need to get that out of my house, right? Is there anything that we jointly share with each other that we need to cut ties on so that I don't have to always be in communication with you, right? So it's about doing a clean sweep, a cleaning out of the house internally and externally so that that person doesn't have a stronghold on you,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
doing cleaning up work so that that person doesn't live rent free in your heart and in your mind.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that you will have to do and is to really think about what the rebuild will look like. You know, getting back to those values I said, getting back to those principles that may have been lost in the sauce because the soul tie was eating it up. So going back to those things, okay, what do I value? How do I see myself? What things was I doing before I got entangled into this soul tie? What are some of the affirmations that I'm going to speak over my life so that I can move in healing from the soul tie? What are new communities I'm looking to engage in? Who are the people that are safe in my life that I'm going to find myself engaging with for safety measures as I'm going on this healing journey? And then last but not least, if you find that you can't do those things on your own, if you're finding that you're still caught up in the soul tie, it's still causing disruption in your life, then you definitely want to get with a mental health professional, a therapist that can guide you and walk you through the process in a safe environment so that you can heal from the soul tie.
Yeah. And Charles said that's great information. And it really is. And I think especially that first step is acknowledging that
Knowledge,
soul ties. I think that people have such a hard time letting go because they haven't acknowledged how deep it is.
that
And
part.
you can't let go if you don't acknowledge how deep it is first.
Absolutely. You gotta acknowledge it. You gotta say, hey, my name is, and I'm in the soul tie.
Right, right.
Like,
Yep. Now, speaking though to the opposite side of that, because something we mentioned earlier was that, you know, you can build a soul tie, you can get your relationship to that level. So, like, if you're with someone, you're like, I love this person, we're good on the intimate level, but I just don't feel like that it's that deep. What are some steps or what are things that you can do to take your relationship from a relationship to a soul tie?
to a soul tie. No, that's great. So taking your relationship from that to a soul tie, it's really about going on deeper exploration of the person, like really getting an understanding about, okay, how were you raised? Where are you from? You know, what were some challenges that came up in your life that you had to overcome? What are some of your highest achievements in your life, right? What are some of your goals? What are some of your ambitions, right? And one thing that I tell single people, right, is to ask this question, to go deeper into that soul tie aspect is, what is your vision for your life? What things are you looking at right now? What things are you seeing for not just now, but in the future per se? and having those life conversations. Of course, we're going to have the conversations about, okay, did you watch the sporting event? Did you see this movie? What's your favorite food? What's your favorite clothing line? Things of that nature. We're going to have those conversations. But to go deeper and to create a healthy soul tie, it's about really asking those questions, excuse me, to help you to understand and know a person authentically.
I find that I love that, like, something that's really trending right now is those like relationship question card games and like deeper conversations. But I love it because I think sometimes people hesitate to ask certain questions because they don't want to seem like they're being intrusive. They don't want to seem like they're being weird. But if you pulled a card that said to ask that question, then I'm just asking what the card said.
Yeah. And I'm all for those card games, especially when you're getting to know somebody and you're dating, because how can I put this? You don't want to seem as though you're a private investigator, but at the same time, I gotta know you beyond the surface,
Right.
to see if this is a good fit for who? For me. Because I get it, right? When we are dating, we want to present the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
We want to present that. We want to, not show not too much of the not too quote unquote good side, right? But if we're saying that, we've been dating and we seeing that this is getting serious, then that's when we gotta go again beyond the surface, not being a private investigator, but really get to know who are you. Is this something that I can handle? This is something that I can't handle that you may have opened up about. Do we align in our values, right? How did you handle challenges when they came up in your life? Because how you handle challenges then will showcase how you handle challenges when we are together. You know what I mean? So just getting that deeply rooted understanding about who am I seeing right now that's in front of me, if we are moving in that serious soul tie type of route.
Yes, and because as Robert said, soul ties can be positive. It's not always something negative.
Exactly.
When you speak to a lot of couples, is what you do, and you mentioned something that's really important, that people often send the best version of themselves. I usually say they send their representative in the beginning. Obviously asking those questions is a good way to get in deeper, but like, have you found, or do you know if there's like an average time where like you're probably still dealing with the representative, not the full version of the person, like because sometimes people rush into it, like you said, they're like, I met them, they're the one, but you don't really know that they're the one. That's their best version of themselves. Like, is there a time and period where that will go away and you're dealing deeper, or you're not really getting that full person until you move in later? What's that kind of like time frame like?
So just from my personal experience as well as clinical experience, I've seen the average time that you're getting the representative, it's about on average 6 months.
6 months?
Yeah, like 6 months, you can kind of tell if this relationship is something that you want to go deeper in, right? So within that 6 months, you're getting per se the representative. And again, kind of like what Charles just said, it depends on the person as well. On average, I've seen 6 months, but you may get the representative in 90 days. You may get the representative in 30 days.
Day one with me, I don't have time. No.
You want to know, right? So that's what I've seen per se on average. And then sometimes, right, kind of like, I don't know if you've been seeing the trend, Who the F Did I Marry?
I watched all of it, 7 hours, but yeah.
Okay.
You may never see the real person.
You may never see the real person, depending on their agenda and their motives, because she didn't see the real person until they moved in with each other, right? So again, it all depends case by case scenario. But what I've seen far as length-wise, if we talk about timeline-wise, I see like an average of 6 months. 6 months, you can kind of tell if this is something that you want to move forward with on a serious level. If you want to pursue it deeply.
And then like, one other thing that I wanted to ask is like, it really feels like we are in circle the block season with relationships, right? Like everywhere we look, couples are getting back together that were together a while ago. I have to admit, for me personally, personal experience, I give it my all while we're in it. And when I'm done, I'm done. Like I'm really done.
Correct.
So it's hard to ever circle that block, but there is something to be said about growth and change and maybe people, develop. So what are some things, like if you're thinking of circling that block, like you just can't let that person go, or it's been a while, you think maybe they have changed, like what are some ways or things that you should look out for if you are thinking of doing it, or should you just not?
Right. So if you're thinking about circling the block on that relationship, one of the things that you would want to look out for is the issue that may have caused you guys to break up. Is that still an issue if and when you reintroduce yourself to that person,
Mm,
right? Have they been making strides? If you see that you're reconnected with that person and they still are engaging in that same behavior, then you don't want to park your car there,
right.
because they again have shown you since the last time y'all were together, things haven't changed. But if they are making changes and you see that, then yes, go for it, green light it. Another thing to do, right? If you're thinking about circling the block, having that conversation about, okay, what are the new boundaries that we're looking to have? These are the things that occurred the last time. How do we look to not make those things an issue if we are looking to reconnect,
Mm,
rekindle this thing? What are the boundaries that we are both committing to in this relationship if we're saying that we're looking to get back together? So those are like the two things right there. Have they changed their behavior? If not, then you may want to say, oh, no. But if they have changed their behavior and they are consistent and they have shown growth, then go for it. Definitely having that conversation about boundaries if we're looking to rekindle, and also talking about with that person, if we're talking about getting back together, talking about, okay, what actions are committing to rebuild a new relationship. We're
mm,
not looking at the old, we're looking at new things that we need to do to rebuild this relationship. And that's an ongoing conversation. That's not a
mm.
one-off conversation. That's an
Yep.
ongoing conversation. And we hold each other accountable to the boundaries and to the actions that we've talked about if we're talking about circling the block.
Mm. And I mean, that's a perfect circle back to where we started this, which was on apologies and repairs. And I'm going to let you go in a minute, but if anyone has questions, please let us know. Before that, though, my last question is,
Yeah.
if you are dealing with a situation where you want to forgive the person, right? They're doing the repair stuff. What
Mhm.
are things? Because I'll admit it's hard for me. I mean, I just said like I don't circle the block, and when we're done, we're done. Like I really mean those things.
Sure.
But like, what if you're like, I want to forgive, I want to move on, but I just can't. Like, what are some things like you can work on with yourself outside of them doing what they need to do for their repair, but with yourself to be open to that repair and to be open to getting that trust back or the whatever back that has been messed up?
For sure. Asking yourself, like, what is causing me to not forgive? What are the hindrances? What are the barriers here that's causing me to not forgive this individual? And also asking yourself, okay, I'm thinking about forgiving this person, but at the same time, are they a good fit for my life? Is this somebody that I want to reintroduce back into my life? Or being honest with yourself, if it's too much for you, then don't go forward with it. But nonetheless, keeping in mind that forgiveness is not for them, it's for you.
Mm,
And understanding that whatever it is that's hindering me from forgiveness, right? Whatever's hindering me from experiencing freedom, I need to tackle that first for me.
yeah.
And then once I forgive myself and forgive the other person, then that's when I go back to the second question. Is that somebody that I want to bring back into my life? Because now that I've forgiven myself and the other person, I'm in a clear state now.
Mm,
I've gotten the clarity that I need internally. So now I can make a informed decision and not an emotional decision about if this person can be a good fit in
yeah.
my life.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And that's why I love having these conversations because, like, Like I said, everyone's on those podcast mics nowadays. And if you put me in front of one, I'd be like, there's plenty of fish in the sea, move on. That's probably why I don't give relationship advice and why I'm still single. But it all depends on the person. And someone said that in the thing too. Like, it depends on the person. It depends on how, bad the split was. And everyone has their opinions based on what they need for their lives, right? So like, versus like for me, a relationship isn't top priority. So my level of tolerance is pretty low. But if that is priority for you, especially if you're someone who wants to have kids, and you can't just listen to someone who's like, keep it moving. You need to find someone who can give you the tips and the things that you need to build that healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Without a plan to heal, both ends might as well call it quits.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I like, and she hit it. Miss Baker hit it right on the head. If we're talking about circling the block, what does this look like? How are we rebuilding this relationship so that it's a healing type of environment?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't solidify that or discuss that, then we might have to, think of some other options.
Yep. Well, I can't tell you thank you enough for your time. I love these conversations. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you make it so relatable and have such great answers. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate you for joining us this evening.
Wow. Thank you for having me again. And I always look forward to being on your platform. Thank you again.
Absolutely. And how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more? Yes. And you have a course coming up, don't you, for couples?
Yes. So follow me on Instagram at urban_counselor. And I am hosting a workshop on the last Thursday of this month called Building a Better Marriage, a blueprint to help your marriage get out of the rut so that it can be in the place of thriving. So I'm hosting that, and I'm giving couples the blueprint on how to have a thriving marriage this last Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern. But you can check me out there on Instagram, and you can follow me at my practice website as well, www.wholelifecenterservices.org. And if you know anybody in the Baltimore area that's looking for couples counseling, I do have spots available.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you everybody who joined this evening with your feedback and your questions. I'm glad you all enjoyed it, and you have a great day. And we'll see you next week at 6 o'clock.
Yes.